Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Bible in 1 Year, the Preacher's Husband. Today we're going through 1 Kings chapter 12, 13, and 14. Tomorrow we're going to go through 2 Chronicles chapter 10 through 12. So today was a pretty interesting read. It was an interesting story. So Solomon has died and Rehoboam became the king. So there's Rehoboam. But we need a little bit of background to kind of see what's going on here. Because clearly, right off the bat, Rehoboam was not the wise king that Solomon was. And his decision making was very apparent right off the bat. But the first section here gives a lot of attention to the northern tribes, the northern section of Israel. And there's reason for that. Now, there's two basic reasons for this attention, and it was because, number one, the covenant that was offered to Jeroboam that we see coming into power here through these chapters. If you remember, in chapter 11, verse 31, God has sent this prophet that told him, "Take 10 pieces for yourself, for this is what the Lord God of Israel says. I am about to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand. I will give you 10 tribes, but only one tribe will remain his for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city I chose out of all the tribes of Israel." So there's this prophecy that God is going to give Jeroboam these 10 tribes to rule over. And it was proper to record the evidence that the northern kings rejected God's covenant here when they're talking through chapter 12. Second, God knew what the future was going to bring. Israel did not immediately disappear from the prophetic and historical picture, okay? So Jeroboam comes in here, and of course he finds out that Solomon's dead, and he was just going to stay in Egypt because he didn't know about this Rehoboam guy. Anyway, he gets summoned, he's called, and make a long story short, he takes over and goes to Sikkim and starts rebuilding the city there. He also rebuilds another city, and he takes over, essentially. And basically, Sikkim is a perfect place because this is where the northern tribes are. Let me get to that. You see Sikkim here on the map, and of course this is the area that is called Israel that Jeroboam takes over. Rehoboam, who was Solomon's son, remains. He actually goes and tries to make a play for this, but the dude he was with gets killed, and of course he barely escapes with his life, and he flees back to Jerusalem. So as he's back in Jerusalem, this becomes his area. Clearly Rehoboam was a pretty arrogant dude, but he was very naive as well. And his foolishness was demonstrated when he sent Adoram, who was the director of the forced labor battalions, to enforce the rules that he was placing on there. Now keep in mind, Rehoboam refused to take the advice of all of these wise men that had once advised Solomon. Instead, he took the advice of some of his buddies that took care of him, some of his followers and assistants, and that messed him up. So he barely escaped with his life from the northerners, and they killed Adoram in the process. So he's back in Jerusalem, but guess what happens? Jeroboam, he gets in charge of Israel. And what does he do? He leads them right back to worshiping them golden calves once again. So here he is leading Israel into idolatry. He does not keep God's promises. And if you look back at chapter 11, verse 38, it says, "After that, if you obey all I command, and you walk in my ways and do what is right in my sight in order to keep my statutes and my commands, as my servant David did, I will be with you. I will build you a lasting dynasty just as I built for David, and I will give you Israel. I will humble David's descendants because of their unfaithfulness, but not forever." That "not forever" part makes me think that God knew what was going to happen in the future. God knew he was not going to be able to live up to this. And even though Solomon tried to kill Jeroboam, he was not successful. And that's how he ended up in Egypt, and that's how Jeroboam ended up being the king of Israel. Not king of Judah, king of Israel. And the tribe of Judah stayed with Rehoboam. So his idolatry led to his downfall. Essentially, Jeroboam's did. And Rehoboam's naivety and arrogance led to his downfall. So what happens to Jeroboam? Well, basically the prophet of God says that God's going to wipe out all the males, and both slave and free, of Jeroboam's house, and he's going to sweep away the house of Jeroboam as one sweeps away dung until it is all gone. So anyone that belongs to Jeroboam and dies in the city, the dogs will eat, and anyone who dies in the field, the birds will eat. For the Lord has spoken, as it is written here in chapter 14, verses 10 and 11. And guess what happened? There's this little blurb about how the Lord is going to cause his son to die as soon as his wife enters the city. So as soon as she leaves her house and steps across the threshold, Jeroboam's son dies. Of course, so it says he's going to kill all his sons. But then it says when Jeroboam dies, his son Nadab became king in his place. What? I thought all his sons were going to die. Well, stay tuned for tomorrow's episode. Actually, not tomorrow's, but a future episode of the Bible in 1 year to find out how God finishes his promise to wipe out Jeroboam's entire lineage. I hope this has touched you. If it has, click the like button and subscribe button, and of course click the little jingle bell so you can get notified the next time I upload a video, which will be tomorrow, for another episode of the Bible in 1 year with the Preacher's Husband. We'll see you then.